So I'm going to run through these sketchbooks, my museum sketchbooks. These are 3 volumes that I have been working on over the last few years. And because I won't be able to have these in the exhibition, because I need to use them, I'll just run through these fairly quickly. So my investigations at the museum have been going on since about 2016-17, when I started visiting to do some research for on migratory shorebirds, and I kept going back to the museum because I just found that the most fascinating place, where all my love of natural history and my love of objects mashed together into this amazing space, where there are all these wonderful, beautiful objects of animals and birds. And so I became a regular visitor to the mammal and bird collection, speaking of birds. And yes, okay, Gromit, thank you. And particularly fell in love with nail-tail wallabies, which later on feature in my work, and kept on visiting to just make pages in my sketchbook because I just found the place so fascinating. So I'll whip through these fairly quickly because there's a lot in here. I started watching and observing and recording on the fly as the taxidermists were going about their business of turning animals into objects. At this stage I had no real idea of what I was doing with the show. I was just there in my happy place, observing what was happening in the museum, and drawing, because, you know, fairly opportunistically, whatever was out, whatever they happened to be working on, is what I would draw. So, I still was going out to zoos and taking my sketchbook there, continuing to sort of try and draw animals in the wild or in the zoos. Which is an entirely different matter. The ones in the museum are very quiet and very still, and they don't move around much. But what you learn in that process helps you. This was a little noisy pitter that came through, and by learning to draw in the museum, I could translate some of those skills into the field and start to get have a little bit more of an idea of how creatures go together. So these are all quick sketches at the zoo. So I'm backwards and forwards in this one, but I started, thinking, well, what does it all mean? What are these? Why do we have taxidermy in our museums? Why are they so important? In the case of this beautiful little greygrass wren, these are the only specimens in the museum, and they're fairly pitiful, and that's all we'll have if we lose those endangered birds in the wild, and that's just not a nice thought. So I continued to work in that sort of vein, just watching what was happening in the space of the museum, and then I was asked to put a work into a show around sharks. So of course I went and investigated the sharks at the museum, and did some studies, and I later came up with a work that was based around those animals as objects. So starting with the sharks in the museum collection, and then sort of charting a de-evolution of those sharks into popular cultural souvenir. And that started me thinking really about what this show could be. So I proceeded to try and coalesce some of those ideas. I was still just visiting every week and just sort of watching and seeing what was going on. It was a good opportunity. I was then starting to think about koala as objects, so I delved into the taxidermy. But also, we had square-tailed kites nesting at home in our yard, and so to be able to investigate the taxidermy and the study skins in the collection was really helpful, just in my own personal study of the creatures that live around us. But yes, objects pertaining to koala was the next thing on my list. So I started with the taxidermied mount, which looks quite realistic but is still only an object, right down to the souvenir It was great to look through the collection and see the study skins. Some of these are really old. They've, they were processed back in 1965. That's a long time ago, and that one by David Flay. So that was interesting. So I'm opportunistic. I will draw whatever's in front of me. We also have powerful owl nesting down in our local creek, so it was great when this head came in. It was a bit smashed up, but I did a little drawing of it because it was very interesting to be able to get up close to things that obviously I can't get up that close to a powerful owl claw in the wild. I wouldn't want to. They're a very intimidating bird. So on it goes. A lot of ideas, a lot of drawings, a lot of thinking, working things out. There's a little thumbnail, what eventually became a large painting. I moved on to turtle as objects, and I used the casts that were in the museum of the green turtle. Tasmanian devil. How often do you get to, look at a Tasmanian devil so closely? I did actually later on in the year go to the Devil Park in Tasmania, and it was great to see them in the real. So these sketchbooks are full of just my exploration into research, taking opportunity to draw from the taxidermied mounts, some study for some classes, and I, was able to borrow from the Hendra Museum Collection loans department and use those in my teaching. I have documented the process of the taxidermy so that I could begin to learn how to do that as well. And so writing down the entire process, and it's fairly confronting, but it's extremely interesting. And I found that all very fascinating to sort of pull apart a bird so that I understood what was going on underneath. And then there was all of the research around, I was doing a lot of reading, and I'd visited a lot of museums. We went to the Natural History Museum in London, which was full of pitiful examples of our native wildlife, because they were taxidermied in a time where people didn't even know what those creatures looked like. My education continued in skinning out study skins. So this was a brown goshawk, and once you have removed all of that material, all that flesh and the the body and the defleshed everything, you've basically got like a wet floppy puppet, which is ready then to be filled up and put back together again, and becomes a museum specimen. So the last sketchbook here. Are you wanting something, mate? Come on then. Come on. All right. You okay now? You happy? Can I keep filming? Because I'd like to show this other sketchbook if you don't mind. I have just kept going because I couldn't keep on going to the museum because of COVID and various other things, so I did do a little bit of sidestepping into some of my own investigations at home, carrying ideas forward, coalescing. By now I had a date for when I was going to have this show, so I needed to start to really coalesce a lot of the ideas and come up with a plan of how I would resolve a lot of the ideas that I had. I was also still doing a lot of looking at anatomy, doing some classes online with New Masters Academy. I did a workshop where I learnt how to taxidermy a rat, lots of visits to zoos again, because the difference between a live animal and a taxidermied animal, it's obvious, but it's so confronting, and it's just horrendous to think that we could lose the originals and all we'd have would be our taxidermied versions. So all of this has sort of gone into my sketchbooks. It's a spare brain. It's somewhere to park all these ideas. Some of these ideas I didn't go on with, didn't end up resolving. I had too many ideas. But you can see the progression. A lot of the investigations did actually sort of come to a resolve. And my education continued in taxidermy. So this is full of just, thumbnails. Some paintings made it, some paintings didn't. I was reading a lot. The Breathless Zoo by Rachel Poliquin was really interesting. What does it mean to be dead but not gone? Another rat. And I was also looking at that souvenir. So I was investigating the museum animal as object in the context of the taxidermy, but also in the context of a souvenir. And I knew I wanted to have something that sort of vaguely harked back to the Wunderkammer idea, which was, of course, the precursor. That Victorian cabinet of curiosities was a precursor to our modern museums. So I looked at the, the very typical museum, or not even museum, but typical souvenir of our native animals, and started looking at how I might investigate them in the same way that I was investigating the taxidermy. So lots of ideas. I mean, the artifice around taxidermy is really interesting to me. It's quite jarring when you see there's a bit of a discomfort. There's a real push-pull around taxidermy. We enjoy it, but there's a frisson of concern because we're not sure how these animals were procured back in the day. We know now that they're very protected, and the only way that a museum can fill a hole in its collection is to wait until one of these creatures dies of natural causes and gets handed in. But if we're not careful, the thought of losing them is the originals is just shocking. So here we go. Lots of sketches for things that didn't end up happening, ideas that realised that things had been done before. Studio Magpie. So my sketchbooks are really the place where I work out what's happening, and although I have more ideas than I have time to execute, I know they're safe if they're down on in my sketchbook, and I may or may not come back to that at a later date. But if you can get along to see the show, that would be great. It's on from May until October 2022 at the Tweed Regional Gallery.